Lila had never been one to stand in front of mirrors and smile. In fact, she often avoided them altogether, afraid that her reflection would confirm what she already felt. She was ordinary, forgettable, and never quite enough. It wasn't that people were cruel to her, it was worse. People were indifferent. Strangers on the street, colleagues at work, even casual acquaintances seemed to carry a quiet, unconscious verdict in their eyes, as if she existed in the background of life rather than the foreground. And in her own eyes, she saw only the things that didn't fit the world's definition of beauty. The uneven freckles across her nose, the hesitant curve of her jawline, the hair that refused to behave, the body that never matched the polished forms in magazines. Lila worked as a graphic designer in a bustling city, where appearances seemed to dictate opportunity. Her office was a kaleidoscope of sharp suits, flawless makeup, and perfectly styled hair, and while no one said it aloud, she felt the silent comparison in every hallway glance and every team meeting. She had talent, undoubtedly. Her designs were clever, clean, and thoughtful. Yet whenever a client praised her work, the compliment felt distant, as though they were applauding a version of her she wished she could see. The version of herself that belonged in those gleaming offices without doubt or self-consciousness. Even in her personal life, Lila felt the weight of being ordinary. She had friends, yes, but their confidence often made her feel like a shadow trailing behind their light. On social media, she scrolled through snapshots of lives that seemed effortless, people smiling with perfect teeth and flawless skin, captions dripping with humor and adventure. She would smile politely at the posts, but inside a familiar ache settled in her chest. The quiet, relentless voice that whispered, "You will never be that. You will never be enough." But there was more than just vanity at play. Lila was tired, not just of how she looked, but of how much of herself she had to hide to feel safe. She had learned early that honesty about her insecurities invited judgment, so she carried a carefully curated persona. Competent, polite, cheerful enough to be agreeable, but never too revealing. Her laughter was measured, her stories carefully chosen, her opinions often muted. She had convinced herself that she was a good enough version of herself for the world, though it was exhausting, always feeling like she was performing, never being fully seen. This constant inner battle had begun to erode her spirit. She longed for a space where she could exist without filters, without the unspoken standards pressing down from every direction. She dreamed of a place where she could be honest, flawed, messy, and still be welcomed. Somewhere quiet, far from the city's glare, where the measure of worth wasn't how well she conformed to expectations, but how true she was to herself. So when she stumbled upon the idea of traveling, of escaping even briefly to a remote place, something stirred inside her. It wasn't just wanderlust, it was a desperate hope for freedom. She wanted to step out of the reflective cage she had built around herself and feel life without mirrors. And though she didn't yet know it, this journey would bring her face to face with someone who would see through the layers of her insecurity. Not to critique them, but to honor them. Lila packed her small bag with the essentials, leaving behind the high heels and heavy makeup, taking only clothes that were comfortable and practical. Her reflection in the small mirror of her apartment showed the same hesitant eyes, the same familiar shadows under her cheekbones. She whispered to herself almost as a prayer, "Maybe I can be enough somewhere else." And for the first time in a long while, she believed that somewhere, someone, or perhaps even a place might see her honestly, without the fancy gloss the world demanded. The plane touched down on a thin strip of tarmac, surrounded by nothing but arid stretches of red and gold earth. Lila pressed her hand against the window, watching the desert unfurl like an endless sun-baked ocean. There were no towering skyscrapers, no honking cars, no crowds of people scrutinizing her every movement. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of relief, not a complete release, but the faint sensation of a world that wouldn't judge her before she even spoke. The village she was headed to was small, almost invisible on any map. It had a handful of homes clustered around a dusty main street, a general store with a creaky sign, and a community center where locals gathered for events and meetings. The buildings were simple, constructed from adobe and timber, colored in warm earth tones that blended with the desert landscape. The air smelled of sage, sun-baked soil, and distant wood smoke. It was quiet, comfortably quiet, and yet alive with subtle rhythms, the low hum of cicadas, the wind sighing over sand dunes, the occasional bark of a dog. Lila rented a small cabin on the outskirts of the village. It had a wooden porch, a bed with a plain quilt, and windows that framed the endless horizon. She unpacked slowly, placing each item with care. No mirrors, no digital screens, no constant reminders of herself, or the expectations she carried from the city. She felt almost vulnerable in this simplicity, but in a good way. A rawness that made her feel real again. She realized she hadn't felt real for a long time. Outside, the desert stretched in all directions, a tapestry of jagged rocks, scrubby vegetation, and occasional bursts of wildflowers that clung stubbornly to life in the harsh sun. The sky was a vast, uninterrupted blue, and the sunlight had a weight to it, bright and golden, that seemed to penetrate the defenses she had built around herself. Lila wandered through the terrain, kicking up sand with her boots, feeling the warmth under her feet and the wind brushing her hair back. Every step was a reminder that she was far from the pressures that had defined her for so long. Here she could just be. She noticed the subtle signs of life in the village, a line of laundry fluttering on a rope, children's laughter echoing from a nearby yard, a small herd of goats grazing near a fence. People passed her on the street, nodding politely, not questioning her presence, not judging her attire or her hair or her quiet hesitation. She felt the strange, heavy sense of permission settle over her, the permission to exist without performance, without masks, without gloss. It was during one of these walks that she first glimpsed Tyanita. He was tending a small garden near the edge of the village, stooped over the soil with hands that moved with quiet purpose. His skin was the color of sunlit bronze, his hair long and dark, pulled back loosely. Something in his presence struck her immediately, a grounded calm that seemed entirely unaffected by the outside world. He was working not for show, not for approval, but because it was necessary, because it was honest. Lila felt a pang of curiosity mixed with apprehension. She had never been someone who wandered into unknown territory without expectation or judgment, yet something about this village, and perhaps about the people who lived here, drew her in. She walked slowly past Tyanita's garden, unsure whether to speak or retreat, and in that moment she realized that maybe this place wasn't just an escape. Maybe it was the beginning of something she had been missing, a chance to see life and herself in a new light. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and deep crimson, Lila returned to her cabin. She stood on the porch looking out over the quiet expanse and felt a rare, delicate hope. Here, in the vast openness and the simplicity of a life removed from expectation, perhaps she could finally begin to shed the weight of constant self-critique. Here, maybe honesty mattered more than beauty, substance more than performance, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the stirring of possibility. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of sagebrush and sun-warmed earth. Lila stepped outside her cabin, carrying a small basket she had found in the general store, intending to gather herbs from the edges of the village. The desert seemed almost endless, stretching into soft ridges and gentle dunes, but she had begun to notice subtle signs of human presence. Smoke curling from chimneys, a distant clatter of tools, footprints that led to hidden gardens tucked behind adobe walls. It was there, near one such garden, that she first saw him clearly. Tyanita was stooped over a patch of soil, carefully tending rows of what looked like beans and corn. His hands were darkened with earth, calloused but deliberate, moving with a rhythm that seemed timeless. He wore simple clothing, a light shirt, worn trousers, and leather moccasins that blended with the sand. His long hair fell over his shoulders in loose strands, catching the sunlight like threads of dark copper. For a moment, Lila simply watched. She wasn't sure if she wanted to speak or remain invisible, a silent observer. There was something about the way he worked, so calm, so grounded, that made the city's constant rush and scrutiny feel absurd by comparison. He wasn't rushing to finish or impress anyone. He wasn't performing. He simply existed in the task at hand, and there was a quiet dignity in that. Eventually, curiosity overcame hesitation. Lila stepped closer, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. "Good morning," she said tentatively, her voice uncertain in the vast open space. Tyanita lifted his head slowly. His dark eyes met hers with a steadiness that made her stomach twist, not from fear but from an unexpected awareness. He didn't smile, didn't frown. He simply acknowledged her presence. "Morning," he replied, his voice low and calm. carrying the kind of quiet confidence that didn't demand attention but naturally drew it. I'm new here, Lila admitted, shifting her weight awkwardly. I just arrived yesterday. She noticed a faint crease in his brow, not judgmental but attentive, as if he genuinely registered her words. He nodded, straightening slightly. That's fine, he said. This is a good place to start fresh, quiet, honest. His gaze returned to the plants in front of him, and Lila realized he didn't need her explanation, didn't need to ask why she was here. There was an acceptance in him that felt entirely absent from her life in the city. I like gardens, she said almost nervously, gesturing toward the rows of plants. I've never really grown anything myself, but I like the idea of it. Tianita studied her for a long moment, then gestured to a small space beside the beans. Then start, he said simply. Plant something, tend it. The earth doesn't care about perfection, only that you try. There was a pause, a silence that didn't feel awkward but comfortable, almost sacred. Lila found herself kneeling beside the patch of soil, her fingers brushing against the warm, soft earth. She felt clumsy at first, unsure of the proper technique, but Tianita's presence was patient, unobtrusive. He didn't hover or instruct unnecessarily. He simply worked alongside her when needed, a quiet companion rather than a teacher. As they tended the garden together, Lila began to notice the small details she had missed in her city life. The way the wind shifted scents across the land, the subtle hum of insects, the soft crunch of soil under hands and boots. And when she glanced at Tianita, she realized that his presence was not demanding or ornamental. It was rooted in honesty. There was no performance, no pretense, no need for embellishment. For the first time in a long time, Lila felt a flicker of ease. She was not being judged, not being measured against impossible standards. She could simply exist, and in that existence, she felt the faint stirrings of curiosity, trust, and perhaps the beginning of something she hadn't dared to imagine, being seen without masks. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the garden. Lila wiped the sweat from her brow, dirt smudging her fingers and streaking her cheeks, and for a moment she allowed herself to simply breathe. The air was dry and warm, scented with sage and soil, carrying the faint whisper of wind through the distant dunes. It was a world away from the cramped, fluorescent-lit office she had left behind, and yet, paradoxically, it felt as if the desert had been waiting for her all along. She knelt by the small patch of beans she had been tending, fingers tracing the delicate veins of the leaves. The rhythm of work had settled her thoughts, calming the incessant chatter in her mind that always told her she was inadequate, invisible, or flawed. Still the voice lingered, faint but persistent, a shadow behind her newfound ease. Tianita moved nearby, his hands brushing gently through the soil, planting seeds with deliberate care. He didn't look at her directly, but she could feel his awareness, like the quiet presence of a river nearby. It was neither intrusive nor demanding. It simply existed, steady and grounding. Lila exhaled and lowered her gaze, her fingers brushing a clump of soil between her palms. "I'm not pretty," she whispered. The words were barely audible, carried off by the soft desert breeze. She felt foolish even saying them, as if confessing a truth that had no place in the bright open world around her. Yet she needed to say it, needed to unburden herself of the weight she had carried for years. Tianita paused in his work, the faint creak of the soil under his knees the only sound. Then he spoke, his voice calm and unwavering. "That's fine. I need honest, not fancy." The simplicity of the statement struck her like a sudden gust of wind, stirring a mix of surprise and relief within her chest. Honest, not fancy. The words seemed to settle into the core of her being, a balm she hadn't known she needed. She blinked, unsure if she should respond, unsure how to process the quiet power of his acceptance. "Honest," she repeated softly, testing the word on her tongue. It felt strange at first, almost foreign. In her life, honesty had always come at a price, judgment, rejection, or the subtle disapproval of others. But here, with Tianita, honesty felt safe. It was not a vulnerability to be punished, but a bridge to connection. He didn't press further. He returned to the work of tending the garden, leaving the space for her to absorb the words fully. She found herself tracing patterns in the soil, thinking about the countless times she had tried to hide, to present a version of herself that met expectations, but never truly reflected who she was. In the quiet of the desert, those masks felt unnecessary, even absurd. Here, honesty mattered more than beauty. Truth mattered more than appearances. A gentle warmth spread through Lila's chest. She realized that for the first time in years, she felt the faint glimmer of freedom, the freedom to exist without performance, without pretense, without the suffocating demand to be enough by someone else's measure. She had come to this place seeking escape, and instead, she had stumbled into something subtler and more profound. Permission. Permission to be herself, however flawed or ordinary that self might seem. She glanced at Tyanita, who continued his work with quiet focus, and something about his calm presence reassured her. The desert stretched endlessly beyond them, vast and indifferent, yet the garden was small, contained, intimate. It was a world in miniature where care and attention mattered, where effort and honesty bore tangible fruit. And in that world, she realized she could begin to grow, not to impress, not to perform, but simply to become. Thank you, she whispered more to herself than to him, for noticing me as I am. Tyanita's hand paused briefly, and he nodded without looking up. You are enough when you are honest, he said simply, returning to the rhythm of planting and tending. For the first time in a long while, Lila allowed herself to believe it. She wasn't pretty, at least not by the world's shallow measure, but she was real, and that perhaps was more than enough. Days passed in the gentle rhythm of the desert, each one marked by subtle yet profound discoveries. Lila woke with the sun, its light spilling across the cabin floor and casting warm hues on the walls. Mornings became a ritual of quiet observation, the distant hills shifting color as light traveled across them, the way shadows fell over the adobe walls of the village, the soft cooing of doves nestled in the eaves. The desert was patient, enduring, and in its vastness Lila felt the first stirrings of patience within herself. She spent hours with Tyanita in the garden. At first, she focused on the mechanics of planting and watering, learning the names of each plant, the rhythms of the soil, the subtle differences between one herb and another. Tyanita worked alongside her with calm attentiveness, never intrusive, never judging. If she stumbled or fumbled with a task, he would offer a quiet correction, or simply demonstrate, letting her absorb his movements in her own time. But it wasn't just the work that brought them closer. It was the spaces in between, the silences filled with unspoken understanding, the shared laughter over clumsy mistakes, the conversations that meandered like a slow creek. He told her stories of the land, of seasons and traditions, of his people's respect for the desert and the life it sustained. Lila shared fragments of her life in the city, the constant pressure to appear polished, the exhaustion of masking insecurities. And with each story, each shared moment, the distance between them narrowed. One evening, after a long day in the sun, they sat on a small ridge overlooking the village. The sky was a tapestry of deep purples and fiery oranges as the sun sank below the horizon. Lila exhaled, her body heavy with fatigue but her mind light with contentment. I didn't realize how quiet this place is, she said softly, almost to herself. It's alive, Tyanita replied, not with noise but with everything that matters. His gaze swept the desert, lingering on the small details, a flicker of movement in the brush, the wind lifting grains of sand in slow dances. You notice it only when you slow down. Lila nodded, tracing patterns in the dust with her fingers. I think I forgot how to slow down. In the city, everything moves too fast. You don't have time to notice anything. People, they notice only what's on the surface. Tyanita glanced at her, his expression quiet but perceptive. The surface is easy. Honest work, honest words, honest heart, that's harder. And rarer. She smiled faintly, feeling warmth spread in her chest. I think I'm starting to understand. Not just about the land, but about myself. Over the next weeks, their connection deepened in ways that transcended words. They shared meals, sometimes prepared with whatever the garden offered, sometimes simple bread and fruit. Lila learned to move with patience, to respect the time each plant needed, the subtle language of growth and change. And through it all, Tyanita's presence was constant, steady, grounding, patient. He never demanded more than she could give, but he always offered what she needed: guidance, understanding, and the quiet permission to be herself. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, Lila began to shed layers of self-doubt. She laughed more freely, spoke more openly, and allowed herself moments of stillness without judgment. She realized that her value wasn't determined by polish or appearance, but by honesty, effort, and care, qualities she had overlooked in herself for far too long. One evening, as twilight settled over the desert and the first stars appeared in the deepening sky, Lila turned to Tianita with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. "I feel different," she said, "like I'm seeing things clearly for the first time. Not just the land, but me." He nodded, meeting her gaze without words. And in that moment, Lila understood that connection was not about perfection or performance, but about presence, authenticity, and mutual respect. She had come seeking escape, but she had found something more: the quiet, enduring power of honesty, and the rare gift of someone who could see it in her. Days in the desert began to blur together in a way that felt both strange and liberating to Lila. There were no strict schedules, no glaring deadlines, no mirrors reflecting every perceived flaw, only the rhythm of the land, the slow unfolding of light and shadow, and the steady companionship of Tianita. She found herself waking earlier, not because she had to, but because the desert invited her to witness its quiet transformation. The sun rose in washes of gold, painting the hills in a light that seemed almost reverent, and she felt the impulse to greet it, to breathe it in, as if the light could seep into her chest and wash away years of doubt. She noticed changes in herself that were subtle but undeniable. Her hands, once soft and fragile from years of avoiding work that might ruin them, were now calloused and strong from tending the garden. Her skin, kissed by sun and wind, carried a warmth she had never recognized in the sterile fluorescent glow of the office. Even her hair, unruly and stubborn, seemed to have found its own rhythm, swaying freely in the breeze rather than battling for conformity. Each small change reminded her that beauty, if it existed at all, was rooted in authenticity, not polish. But the transformation that mattered most was within. Lila found herself reflecting differently on the years she had spent measuring herself against others' expectations. The voice that had once whispered endlessly about her inadequacies grew quieter, not silenced but softened by something new: perspective. She realized that the opinions she had internalized, the subtle judgments of colleagues, strangers, even friends, were not universal truths. They were fleeting observations, reflections of others' priorities, not her worth. Tianita's presence played a crucial role in this shift. He didn't offer grand proclamations or lofty advice. He simply existed as a constant, grounded reference point. His acceptance of life as it was and of people as they were had an almost magnetic effect on her. She observed how he approached every task with care and honesty, whether planting a seed, repairing a fence, or sharing a meal. He measured value not in perfection, but in intention and integrity. Watching him, Lila realized that she had spent so long striving to be enough by superficial standards that she had never learned how to be enough for herself. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the wind stirred the sand in lazy spirals, Lila paused in the garden. She watched a row of beans she had planted weeks ago, now vibrant and growing steadily. She smiled, a slow, genuine expression, and noticed a warmth spreading in her chest. Pride not for the praise of others, but for her own effort and care. "I can do this," she whispered to herself. "I can be enough just as I am." The realization was liberating. She no longer felt the urgent need to mask her flaws or to present a curated version of herself. Mistakes became part of learning rather than a reflection of inadequacy. Her laughter, once measured and restrained, emerged easily and often. She found herself speaking freely to Tianita, sharing her thoughts and fears, and he listened without judgment, responding only with quiet understanding or gentle guidance. One evening, as they sat on the ridge overlooking the desert, Lila turned to him. "I feel lighter," she said. "Like I've been carrying weights I didn't even know were there, and somehow I'm putting them down." Tianita nodded, his gaze on the horizon. "That is the desert," he said softly. "It strips what is unnecessary, leaving only what is true, what is honest, what endures." For the first time, Lila believed it, not just intellectually, but in her bones. She had come to the desert seeking escape from the world's judgments, but she had found something greater, a way to see herself honestly, and to value that honesty above all else. The reflection she carried in her mind was no longer distorted by fear or expectation. She had begun to understand that being seen for who she truly was, not for what she appeared to be, was a gift, and one she could finally give to herself. And in that quiet desert evening, with the wind whispering through the brush and the sky deepening into twilight, Lila felt a profound shift. She was still the same person in form, yet different in essence. She was becoming whole, not by changing to please the world, but by learning to honor herself, honest and unadorned, in a way that no mirror or city street could ever teach her. The desert sun was high and relentless that morning, casting sharp shadows across the garden. Lila wiped her brow, her hands still streaked with soil, and paused to catch her breath. For weeks, life here had unfolded like a gentle, forgiving rhythm. The slow, deliberate work in the garden, quiet conversations with Tianita, evenings spent watching the sky shift from gold to violet to deep indigo. It had been a sanctuary, a place where she could exist without masks, without judgment, and most importantly, without the relentless pressure to conform. And yet, a letter had arrived 2 days prior, a simple, unassuming envelope from her office in the city. At first she had ignored it, pretending it did not exist, but now it sat in the cabin beside her, the words on the page persistent in their call. "We need you back. Important projects are underway. Your presence is required." The words stirred a storm of conflicting emotions. She wanted to stay, wanted to remain in the desert where honesty, effort, and presence mattered more than appearance or approval. But she also felt the old tendrils of responsibility, obligation, and habit pulling her back toward a life that had once defined her. She was torn between two worlds, one that demanded performance, polish, and conformity, and one that valued patience, authenticity, and truth. As she wandered through the garden, Tianita noticed her preoccupied expression. "Something weighs on you," he said quietly, his voice gentle but perceptive. Lila hesitated, then held up the letter. "It's from the office. They want me back. They say they need me. I don't know if I can go." Her fingers trembled slightly, betraying the conflict inside her. "I've changed. I see things differently now, but can I survive there without losing myself?" Tianita studied her for a long moment, his hands still in the soil, his gaze steady and calm. "You must decide what matters more," he said finally. "Not what they need, not what the world expects, but what you need. The desert taught you something. Do not forget it when you leave." The words settled over her like a shadow, comforting yet demanding. Lila thought of the city streets, the fluorescent lights, the endless meetings, the hushed critiques, the constant sense of inadequacy pressing from every corner. She thought of the masks she had worn, the versions of herself she had forced into existence just to be acceptable. And then she thought of the desert, the soil in her hands, the patience it demanded, the quiet pride of honest work, the trust and acceptance Tianita had shown her. A pang of fear pierced her chest. Could she truly return to that old life unchanged? Could she hold on to the honesty she had discovered here, while navigating the superficial expectations of her former world? And if she tried and failed, would she lose herself entirely? Tianita moved closer, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Fear is natural," he said. "But the measure of strength is not in avoiding it. It is in facing it with honesty. Carry what you have learned. That is your true guide." Lila exhaled slowly, feeling a mixture of dread and determination. She had been given a gift in this place, the permission to be herself, unvarnished and true. Leaving would not erase that gift, but she would have to choose consciously to carry it with her, to let it guide her actions, her words, her choices, even in a world that often demanded compromise. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her bag. The decision had not yet been made, but the fear that had once controlled her had softened. She felt the first stirrings of courage, not the loud, heroic kind, but the quiet, enduring kind that comes from knowing your own truth and being willing to defend it. That evening, as the desert sky blazed with color and the wind rustled through the scrub, Lila knelt beside the garden, feeling the soil sift through her fingers. She realized that the world beyond the desert might be relentless and demanding, but she no longer needed its approval. She had discovered something stronger, the power of honesty, the resilience of patience, and the quiet strength of being fully herself. And in that realization, the first seeds of resolution began to take root, even as the path forward remained uncertain. The morning light poured over the desert in muted golds and soft pinks, casting long shadows across the garden. Lila stood on the porch of her cabin, breathing in the warm, dry air, and watched the horizon stretch endlessly before her. The letter from the city rested unopened on the table behind her. It no longer carried urgency or fear. It was simply a reminder that her past life existed, waiting for her choice. She thought of the weeks she had spent here, of the quiet rhythm of the desert and the lessons it had imparted. She remembered the soil between her fingers, the sweat on her brow after long hours of tending the garden, and the evenings watching the sky deepen into a tapestry of stars. She remembered Tianita's words, honest, not fancy. Those words had become a touchstone, a compass guiding her through moments of doubt and insecurity. For the first time, Lila felt fully aware of her own strength. She had come to the desert seeking escape from judgment, and she had found something more profound: the ability to see herself clearly, to value honesty above appearances, and to honor her own truth. That realization filled her chest with warmth and a quiet resolve she had never experienced in the city. She walked to the garden, kneeling beside the rows of beans and herbs she had nurtured. The plants had grown strong under her care, their leaves vibrant and their roots deep in the soil. She smiled, tracing a finger along a tendril that curled toward the sun. This is my work, my effort, my honesty. No one else needed to approve of it. No mirror, no office critique, no social expectation could diminish its value. Tianita approached, carrying a small basket of fresh herbs. He handed her a handful and their fingers brushed lightly, a gesture of shared understanding rather than romance. "You've grown," he said simply, his voice calm and steady as though he were stating a fact, not offering praise. Lila nodded. "I have," she said, "and not just the garden. Me too." She paused, feeling the weight of the decision she had been avoiding. "The city. It's waiting for me, but I know I cannot go back the same. I can't let it shape me like it did before. I have to carry what I've learned here with me." Tianita studied her for a moment, his eyes reflecting the morning sun. "Then you will," he said. "The place matters less than the way you carry yourself. Honesty, patience, care, these are not bound to this land alone. You can take them anywhere." A sense of clarity settled over Lila. She realized that the city, with all its expectations, would not define her unless she allowed it. She could return if she wished, but she would do so on her own terms, guided by her values rather than fear or conformity. She could navigate the world with the honesty she had cultivated, carrying the quiet strength of the desert within her. The decision was not a dramatic, instant resolution. There was no sudden leap or declaration. Instead, it was a quiet, unwavering certainty that grew as she breathed in the dry, warm air and let the light of the morning fill her vision. She felt grounded, like the roots of the plants she had nurtured, strong enough to bend but unbroken by wind or storm. "I'll go back," she said softly, more to herself than to Tianita. "But I'll do it differently. I'll be honest with myself and with the world. I'll let what matters guide me, not what they expect." He nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Then you are ready, and wherever you go, this will stay with you." Lila lingered for a moment longer, looking out over the desert, feeling gratitude and reverence for the lessons she had learned. She knew she could not take the desert with her physically, but its spirit, the patience, the honesty, the quiet strength, would live within her. She was ready to step back into the world, not as the timid, self-conscious version of herself who had arrived weeks ago, but as someone who understood her worth and could navigate life with integrity and courage. And with that understanding, Lila felt the tension lift from her shoulders. She turned to the cabin, ready to face her next steps with honesty, confidence, and the quiet assurance that she was enough exactly as she was. The desert had a way of settling into a person, like sand slipping softly into every crevice, finding spaces they didn't even know existed. Lila stood once more on the small ridge overlooking the village, the wind tugging lightly at her hair, carrying the scent of sage and earth. She inhaled deeply, letting the air fill her lungs and the silence fill her mind. It was a silence that spoke louder than the city's constant noise ever could. A quiet that demanded nothing and offered everything in return. She thought back to the first day she had arrived, tentative and unsure, carrying the weight of judgment and self-doubt like an invisible shroud. She remembered the fear that had accompanied every glance in the mirror, every casual comment from colleagues, every passing stranger's opinion. She had believed that beauty, polish, and perfection defined worth. Yet now, standing in the open desert, she could see how profoundly mistaken that belief had been. The garden lay below her, rows of beans and herbs flourishing under the patient care she had devoted to them. Each plant was a testament to growth that required time, attention, and honesty. She realized with a quiet astonishment that she had grown in the same way. The desert had stripped away the superficial measures she had clung to for so long and revealed what truly mattered: integrity, effort, patience, and the courage to be seen as she really was. Her thoughts turned to Tianita, whose presence had been a steady anchor through the subtle storm of transformation. He had not demanded change. He had simply shown her the value of authenticity through his own actions and patience. With him, she had learned that worth was not measured by approval or appearance, but by honesty, by the willingness to engage with life and with others as one truly is. His words, honest, not fancy, echoed in her mind, a mantra that had taken root deep within her. Lila reflected on the times she had whispered her insecurities aloud, the trembling voice that admitted she was not pretty. At first, she had expected judgment, dismissal, or pity. Instead, she had received understanding and acceptance. That moment, so small and seemingly insignificant, had been the turning point. It was the first time she had been allowed to exist fully in her own truth, and it had opened the door to a transformation that was neither sudden nor dramatic, but profound in its quiet persistence. The horizon stretched endlessly before her, a reminder of possibilities and choices. She knew she would return to the city, to the responsibilities and pressures she had once sought to escape. But she also knew she would carry the desert with her, not as a place but as a state of mind. The lessons of patience, authenticity, and honest effort would guide her steps, tempering the rush of deadlines and the judgments of others. She had discovered an inner strength that was unshakable because it was rooted in truth, not approval. A small smile curved her lips. The fear that had once accompanied every step had diminished, replaced by a quiet confidence. She had learned that she was enough, not because the world validated her, but because she valued herself. She could walk into any situation, face any challenge, and remain grounded in that knowledge. The desert wind whispered around her, carrying the promise of continuity and change, of growth and endurance. Lila closed her eyes briefly, letting the moment sink into her bones. The world beyond the village awaited, but she would face it differently now. She would move through it with honesty, with courage, and with the calm assurance that had been cultivated in the quiet soil and the golden sunlight of this remote desert. When she opened her eyes, the sky was a deep, endless blue, streaked with the soft pinks and oranges of morning. She breathed in once more, steady and deliberate, feeling the desert's pulse align with her own. For the first time in her life, Lila felt truly seen, not by anyone else but by herself. And in that recognition, she found a profound, unshakable peace. She turned back toward the cabin, ready to gather her belongings, ready to take her next step. The journey was far from over, but she had discovered the compass within herself: honesty, patience, and courage. And with it, she would navigate every path ahead. The desert morning was crisp and golden, the horizon stretching endlessly in warm shades of amber and rose. Lila stood at the edge of the small dirt road leading from the village, her bag packed with only what she truly needed, the letter from the city tucked safely inside. She looked back at the cabin, the garden, and the ridge where she had spent so many contemplative mornings. Every corner of this place held memories, lessons, and quiet moments of revelation. It had been a sanctuary, a crucible, and a teacher, and it had changed her in ways she would carry for the rest of her life. Tianita emerged from the garden, his presence calm and grounded, as if he were a natural extension of the desert itself. He carried no words of farewell, only a steady gaze and the faintest smile that spoke of understanding and continuity. Lila approached him, feeling the warmth of connection that had grown between them over weeks of shared labor, quiet conversation and unspoken understanding. "I'm ready," she said softly, though the words carried a weight of conviction. "To go back, to face the world differently, to carry what I've learned here." He nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a steady, unwavering calm. "You are ready," he said, "and wherever you go, you take the desert with you." Lila smiled, letting the words sink into her chest. The desert was not a place she could carry physically, But its lessons, the patience, the honesty, the quiet courage, would remain rooted within her. She had learned that being seen for who she truly was mattered far more than pleasing the expectations of others. That honesty, effort, and authenticity were the foundation of self-worth, and no mirror or opinion could diminish it. Before leaving, she knelt in the garden one last time, running her fingers through the soil. The plants she had nurtured flourished under her care, a living testament to growth, patience, and dedication. She whispered a quiet farewell, not as an ending, but as acknowledgement. Thank you for teaching me to see, to care, to be honest. Rising, she turned toward the road, feeling the weight of the past weeks balance lightly against her spirit. Every step forward was deliberate, steady, guided by the truth she had cultivated. The village receded behind her, the adobe homes and winding streets blending into the expanse of the desert, yet their imprint remained, a reminder that transformation is not defined by place, but by presence. The journey ahead was uncertain. The city would test her patience, challenge her resolve, and confront her with old pressures and expectations. But for the first time, she felt equipped to meet it. She would navigate the world with honesty, choosing effort and integrity over appearance and approval. She would carry the quiet strength of the desert within her, a compass to guide every decision, every interaction, every moment she chose to be herself fully. As the sun climbed higher, painting the land in brilliant gold, Lila walked down the dirt road with a calm, purposeful stride. The wind brushed against her face, carrying the faint scent of sage and soil, a reminder that the lessons of this place were not fleeting. They would endure just as she had endured, and she could meet whatever came next with grace and courage. She glanced back one final time, and in that moment she saw Tyanita standing near the garden, rooted in the earth he tended, a silent witness to her growth. She raised a hand in quiet acknowledgement, and he returned the gesture, a bond of understanding that needed no words. Then, turning fully toward the road ahead, Lila stepped into the future with confidence. She was still herself, still ordinary, imperfect, human, but now she was enough. Honest, strong, present, ready to face the world not as a version anyone else expected, but as the truest version of herself. And in that step she carried the desert, the garden, and the lessons she had learned, proof that true beauty, strength, and worth are found not in polish or perfection, but in honesty, authenticity, and the courage to be fully, unapologetically you.